6's overdrive. Look at the gorgeous hoarfrost everywhere. Oh, it's nice out here. It's Christmas and the New Year season. I thought, what better time to show you the advanced features of the DJI Osmo Action and how to get the best possible looking footage out of your camera. Anyway, guys, stick with me. Let's show you how it's done. Welcome back. Had to go and put a jacket on so I could get out here and talk to you a little bit. This is going to be unscripted, so it might be a little bit rough, guys, but we're going to show you how to get the best footage out of this baby. I'm sure all of you have seen all the commercials, whether it be for the Hero GoPros or the Osmo Action or the Sony, and those guys actually make a promotion video to show off their camera skills. It looks beautiful. Like, absolutely stunning. You're wondering, why can't I get that kind of footage? Well, first thing is don't film on a day like today. When there's no clouds in the sky and everything's gray, it's gonna look almost black and white. So that brings me to the second point of actually film in beautiful conditions and everything to get those settings. You want to be in the best possible lighting you can possibly get. That means waiting for golden hour and everything. These cameras were designed to work in those settings. They like lots of light, lots of contrast, lots of color. They're designed for that, and they do a great job of reproducing that. Where they fail a little bit is in low light situations, because the sensors are small. So now that we've determined the best conditions for your action camera, let's go back to the studio and I'm going to show you how to set up and why you set up your frame rates and your resolution and everything like that, so that you can get the best out of it. So let's go back to the studio. Okay, well, we're back at the studio, and I have to say, you might notice through this video that we talk about being at the farm around Christmas time, and I wish you guys a Merry Christmas on the video later. And yeah, I forgot my camera at the farm, so it's a week later. It's now New Year's Day, and I'm just starting to record this in-studio part of this tutorial. But let's get into it. Let's show you guys how this thing works, but if this thing takes a while to come out and you're trying to figure out why I'm talking about Christmas and it's 2 weeks later, well, now you know why. Okay, guys, let's get this going. I'm going to show you the optimal settings, and I'm going to show you how to get them on your camera, what you need to do, where you need to go, and all that. And I'm going to set it up the way I would set it up. And there's going to be a little bit of a difference between what the other guys tell you and what I tell you. And that's because I've found some stuff out that even surprised me a little bit about these digital stabilization systems in the Heroes and the DJI Osmo Actions. So this is a trick even if you're watching and you have a Hero. I'm going to show you something that's a little bit of a surprise, quite frankly. So how do we set this up? Well, there's not just one way. There's about 3 different settings that you want to program into this camera. And the Osmo Action, remember, has this side button on it. And that's going to be your lifeline right there, because we're going to show you how to program these settings into this camera and then make this so easy to use that you have access within 2 seconds to just about any type of filming that you want to do on this camera. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get into this camera, turn it on, swipe up from the bottom, get into the frame per second menu that has resolution at the top and FPS at the bottom. And what we're going to want to do is put that on 30 frames per second as your default at 4K. 4K is your highest frame rate. 30 frames per second will be the closest to the cinematic. Now you can actually do it 24 frames per second, but personally, when they release updates on this camera, they seem to want to do it in 30 frames per second. And it's a lot more clear. I found out after editing these videos that the 30 frames per second and the 60 frames per second were the sweet spots for DJI. In most cases, it's 24 or 25 if you're PAL. But when they do all the updates on this camera for the rock steady and everything, it always seems to be at 30 and 60 frames per second. And when I tried it out, it was a lot more buttery smooth on the digital stabilization. So I'm going to get you to pick 30 frames per second at 4K, and then we're going to get to the main menu by pulling down from the top, and then we're back out of it. Next, we're going to leave this in automatic that way, and we're going to set up our first customized setting in the camera. So we need to now pull down from the top of the camera, click on the far left top row. There's a person basically in that top left corner, and then it'll say add a user. It's going to ask you to save current configuration to see whatever number you're on right now. Now, when you press that, it's going to save what we just picked up. It's going to be rock steady 30 frames per second at 4K. Okay, now to make sure that we're into that position, let's pull down from the top again and let's go to the settings on the far right. And then you'll go to your quick switch, and it's going to ask you to either tap on or tap off the settings that you have saved already and what order you want in them. If you got a blue check mark on it, it means it's enabled in the quick switch, which means you'll be able to access any of those settings by just pressing this button really quickly. Within 2 seconds, you can get whatever setting you want. So let's do another custom setting at the 4K 60 frames per second. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to swipe up from the bottom. We're going to go to 4K. We're going to slide the bottom one to 60 frames per second. That'll actually be better for action sequences instead of just a talking head, you know, general filming somebody walking or something. But when you get into real action, like when things get fast, you want it a little bit more crispy, and you want to be able to maybe slow it down into slow motion sometimes as well. So we're going to set up a setting for 4K 60 frames per second. After you're done that, just simply pull down again, go back by pulling down one more time, go back to that user, that man looking thing at the top, click on him, and then add another C setting in there, and make sure by getting back onto it, you want to pull down again and go to your settings menu and make sure in your quick switch menu that that's ready to go, and that's your second setting. Holy continuity issues, he just changed his shirt. Yeah, well, it's day 2. I ran out of time yesterday doing this, so let's get into these custom settings. We've already done the automatic settings. Everything's set at 4K 60 frames per second on my camera right now because it was the last thing we looked into. And now I'm going to show you how to get into manual settings. Now, when you're done with these manual settings, if you want to freeze them as having that setting saved in to your camera, then you'll just go and do the same process we did before of doing a customized setting. These settings will also be stored onto your customized settings if you pre-save them under one of those profiles. So here's what you have to do to get into manual. You pull from the left to the right, and then you see a little submenu on the right hand side that says Auto and M. You have your ISO max, your shutter speed, and your EV. Your EV will not be changed except for when you change your shutter speed and your ISO. Your ISO max, I have mine set for 400 because I usually use these cameras outside, not inside. And usually 400 will do everything without having anything too grainy. This is actual footage off the camera right now. So this is the footage off the camera. You can see how nice and moody that would be if you got somebody walking through that picture right now. It'd be absolutely gorgeous, and it would give the illusion of nighttime and the darkness in the shadows instead of the ISO blowing everything out. Now, if you need to do night modes or indoors, I don't recommend going too much higher and setting that at your ISO max should set maximum 800 in my opinion. Some people go 1600. I like 800. So your ISO, you can set that, the higher the number, the more it's going to brighten up the picture, but the more grainy and less color you'll get out of your picture. Your shutter speed should always be double whatever your frames per second are in. So if you're at 4K 30 frames per second, you should be at a 60th of a second for your shutter speed. If you're at 4K 60 frames per second, your minimum shutter speed or your locked-in shutter speeds should be 1/120th of a second. Now, after you set those to where you want, we need to tap on the little film or camera little icon at the bottom right-hand corner. Now, we're going to get into white balance. White balance is how much coolness or warmth
is in your picture. And that can change depending if you're facing the sun or if the sun's behind you or if you go into shadows, and you don't want your camera going up and down and changing those all the time. So you want to set those to each individual. So you aim your camera at the spot where you feel the nicest picture is. And then what you do is you tap on the white balance and you're going to see auto, underwater, and custom. So hit auto, aim it to where you want to aim it, and then after you hit auto, scroll down till it says custom, and it'll set that custom for what you aimed it for. And that's all you have to do. If you want to do your own customized ones, you can scroll up and down there too. The next thing we're going to do is click on color. And this is, if you're going to be doing post editing in Premiere or Final Cut or anything like that, you're probably going to want Decine-alike so you can take control of how your picture looks. If not, then you're going to want to leave it in normal and just run the camera the way it is. And this is if you're doing quick video editing on your phone or you're just using your iMovie or whatever. You're not going to get in and change all your color profiles. And last but not least, if you take the dewarp, you can turn that on or off. Now, dewarp is not available in all situations. It'll tell you by just saying that off is the only profile that you can get for that. All right, you're good to go. If you get out of those menus now, whatever settings you put in here, you can again go to the top left corner, hit that guy. It'll come up with C1, C2, C3, whatever, and you create your custom profile, put it in there, go to your quick section again, and lock it in if that's what you want to do. Personally, I prefer keeping it automatic so it's ready to go. I only have those two settings. And then if I want to go and get that little bit juicier footage, then I swipe it over and I set everything up. And I'm a big fan of ND filters for keeping my shutter speeds at exactly double the frame rate. But you know what? It's not a deal breaker. As I'll show you later in this vehicle, you can actually have those frame rates bump up, and the stabilization on these cameras actually likes the high frame rate. Now finally, if you're trying to find where all your hyperlapse and time lapses and your photo modes are in, you can click on the top or on the side left button, and you can get into that and you can find all those settings. And remember that you can change them by going to the settings menu and clicking on and off which ones you like. The hyperlapse and time lapses, you can go back into manual mode and set those customly how you want them to be. So let's go back to the footage at the farm and see how that's all working out.
Merry Christmas, everybody. I haven't had a chance to get any footage yet because basically it's looked like this for the last 3 days. It's Christmas Day now, and I've just got to wait till we get some beautiful weather out on the farm so I can show you what these cameras can really do. Currently we're recording in 4K, 60 frames per second, and we are at 1/800 ISO and a white balance of 6,000. One of the coolest things about this camera, or action cameras in general, is that they are remarkably great at doing everything in automatic mode. I know this goes counterproductive to all these videos out saying how to get the most out of your footage, but you need that too if you want to get some cinematic B-roll. But when you want to be ready for the action, you just want this camera to be ready to go at a second's notice. Now, one of the great tips about this, there's a couple really neat tips. First, you should turn on face detection. So you can see right now, my face is fairly well exposed. When you go into shadows and everything, it'll keep the exposure and the white balance on your face. Another setting that I like to do when it's nice and bright and sunny out is I like to set my ISO max up to 400. Now this means that it won't readjust the shadows quite as extreme as the other ones. And being in these automatic modes also mean no ND filters, just pure out of the camera, ready to go, ready to shoot, no microphones, no monitors. That's what this camera's all about. There's another setting in this camera that allows you to hit spot metering and then put it wherever you want in the camera. And that's really handy for moments like this too, when your face is overexposed 1 minute and then it's underexposed the next, and then you put the sun in the background like this. As long as I keep myself in the middle of this frame, I still have exposure on my face. And it works pretty well. It'll blow out the skies in the background, but that's okay as well. So today is going to be a beautiful blue sky day. Maybe we'll get some clouds in the sky, but it's just exactly what this camera is made for. So we'll do some 4K 24s, some 4K 60s, and we'll get some slow motion going for you today as well. The next mode we want to hit is 2.7K, 60 frames per second. I'm not going to show you the 24 frames per second. Same rules apply. The only difference we're talking about right now, when we go into 2.7K, it's going to make it easier on your computer if you got a little bit of a slower computer. And that goes the same for 1080. Still really good footage. It's going to pass for YouTube or social media or anything. But let's show you what 1080 looks like, because you can actually frame at 240 frames per second if you got good enough light, and the slow motion on that is beautiful. Now, when you're going into 1080p though, all of these settings with the Rocksteady only work up to 60 frames per second. So, as soon as you do that, you're going to have to put the thing on a tripod or something like that if you're going to want to go into 1080, 240 or 120. But let's show you what that looks like, because you can vlog in that and then you can all of a sudden break down into real slow motion. So I'm going to show you all the different modes in 1080p, because this is a great one for editing. It won't jam up your computer so much. So this is 1080p at 24 frames per second with Rocksteady on. This is 1080p at 60 frames per second with Rocksteady on. 1080p at 120 frames per second, no Rocksteady on now, so we're getting a little bit jittery when we're walking around. Let's show the slow motion on that. Then last but not least is 240 frames per second in 1080p. This you can really get the juicy slow motion action. So guys, that was about it. That's about all I can tell you about this camera and how to set it up to make it extra special. But remember, the most important part is always going to be getting that juicy shot. So if you have to keep it in auto, and that should be your default, do that. But then when you want to get that extra little nice touch, then put it into manual mode, and these settings, they're going to set you up for success. Anyway guys, remember to share, like, comment, and subscribe. I hope this video helped you out, and we'll see you on the next one. This is Six's Overdrive. Bye-bye.